Hello, everybody. Welcome in. We're going to get started in about 3 minutes and 30 seconds. So, everybody, time to wait. Moderate, please. With us for a little bit before we get started. For the folks who are here early, you want to share your names, your pronouns, and one thing I would love to learn today is what cracked your egg. Slash, you don't know what made you really think let's have a definitely. Hey Alexa. Oh, my audio is coming. It's letting me know. Hey Blue, hey Cat, hey Stephanie, hey Z. By the way, for the folks who the box says host and panelists, make sure that you select, you click that button and then you select everyone when you're chatting so that other folks can see it too and not just me and Alo. Hey Rachel, hey Julie, hey Toshi. I feel like I'm seeing some new faces here. So. Does anyone want to share what cracked their egg? I got all of your names, but hey Samantha, my last surreal dream pushed me over the edge. Ooh.
Yo, someone.
I
like it being a surreal dream.
I love dream states. I'm very like spiritual as a person, so that really resonates with me.
Yeah.
Jillian, hey Jillian. I had awful experience for here for Halloween and wanted to be the theme of it. That was
Halloween costumes and video game preference. Who do you want to be in a video game? I feel like those are big ones.
Yeah, totally. Hey Jenny, hey Lilith. Jenny says preferring her femme self. Beautiful. He says still on a journey, started laser hair removal with pause on eyebrow threading, so making progress, slow but steady. You're making progress. I'm happy for you. I've actually started considering laser hair removal for bottom surgery recently, so I'm happy that you're kind of on that process of just like transition. Wherever you get started is where you start. Hey Cynthia, nice seeing you again. Aww. Maybe letting her dress you over at her home is really lovely. The webcomic Venus Envy cracked my egg. Yes, I love.
I know that one.
This is really beautiful. I'm gonna let this like sit for a little bit longer because I want to read through what everybody is saying. Kat says, I was plotting out a gender change sci-fi short story when I had a shocking realization it was actually a self-insert wish fulfillment story. And I sort of blue screened. Wow. Also same envisioning yourself as a female character. Blue said when Oprah showed an intersex woman when they were 7. watching Stargate and wanting to dress and be like Samantha Carter. Wow. Thanks y'all for sharing. What cracked my egg was being born. Let's go. That is amazing. I love that. Thank you so much, everybody, for indulging me. And yeah, I think we're gonna get started. Thank you again for being here. My name is Rai. My pronouns are she, her, trans femme person based in Ohlone, Oakland, California, and I'm the community education program manager here at Plume. Thank you everybody for sharing what cracked your egg. I was thinking about it and I was like, do I want to share a silly one or like a serious one? I think like the earliest memory that I had of cracking my egg, or a memory that I kind of pushed away, was like there was this like ad that was I'm sure it's totally fake, but it was like, oh, for women who want to grow their like breasts, you can pull on like your nipples to like enlarge it, and you just do that every day for like a month. And I was like 9 years old at that time, and then I started doing it, and I think it was the same time that I was gaining weight. And I thought that they were happening at the same time. I was both excited and also really scared. And so I stopped. And yeah, and I feel like now as an adult, I'm like, I think my younger self would be very happy about where
Yeah,
I am. So yeah.
you got there
Um,
eventually.
yeah, really excited to be doing this book talk with Aloe Johnston. Aloe Johnston is the author of this book titled Am I Trans Enough? How to Overcome Your Doubts and Find Your Authentic Self. And I'm just really excited to be kicking off Mental Health Awareness Month with him as well. It is May. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. Today is also May Day as well for workers' rights. So kind of a beautiful time to be having this conversation. So thank you so much. We'll begin diving into this event in a little bit, but I want to thank Aloe so much for being here and just give you a little bit of space to introduce yourself. And also would love to hear what cracked your egg.
Yeah, my name is Aloe Johnston. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in Los Angeles. And um, let me look at my bio. What are the relevant, important parts of this? Basically, I became a therapist with the intention of working with trans people. I was sort of on my journey of figuring out my gender in the process of also studying psychology and becoming a therapist, and those two things came hand in hand. And yeah, I had absolutely no intention of writing a book. I was in the midst of pandemic in 2020. People were reaching out to me. The most people has ever reached out to me because I think that was a time that many people's eggs were cracking. And I just couldn't meet with everyone who was interested, but I was like, maybe I'll write an article. Maybe I'll write an article about some of the things I keep talking about with clients over and over again. And I started writing, and then I was like, this feels kind of long for an article. Maybe it's an article series. And then I was like, this seems kind of long. And then my kind friend who's an editor was like, just admit you're writing a book. And I ended up writing a book accidentally. I felt like that person that was telling everyone you don't need to be productive during the pandemic, and then I wrote a book. But it was just very much the book that I wanted to have when I was going through my own process, and didn't seem like what I wanted existed in that way. So that's what happened, and that's how I'm here. And the thing, this didn't crack my egg, I wouldn't say, but I think looking back, I was talking about this a little bit earlier before we started, that watching the Newsies as a child should have been a sign because I was obsessed with the Newsies, and I don't like musicals, so I didn't understand why I was obsessed with the Newsies. And now looking back, I'm like, it's because it's all boys. It's about being a boy. There's just only boys in that movie. So I think looking back, that could have been something, but it wasn't. I think what actually ended up doing it was just being on testosterone. I was not sure until I was doing it.
I love that. You know, that's that I feel like that kind of feels similar, at least with me and my relationship with estrogen. I didn't know that I wanted to do it until I was doing it.
Right.
And I think the thing that officially cracked my egg was wearing hoop earrings. It felt like I was looking at a completely different person in the mirror. And
Yeah,
yeah, it was like, whoa, I feel so like I'm looking at my face for the first time.
that's great.
So yeah, thank you so much for being here. I love the accidental book drop from the pandemic. And yeah, I'm super, super excited to just be diving into it. Just as a note for folks here too, we have a discount code with the book. Somewhere here. I'm gonna skip ahead real quick. We have a book discount code. You can use 20 per you can my words are jumbled. You can use Allo 20 for 20% off of his book, Am I Trans Enough, over at JKP. And also, we are going to be launching a 4-week book club series. It's bi-weekly. It would be hosted by Allo Johnston himself. We'll be going through the book in 4 parts because the book is split up into 4 different parts. And if you are a Plume member, I just sent the RSVP link into the chat as well. So if that's something that you're interested in, if you want to dive into the book together, this is a great opportunity to do it.
Yeah, love to have you.
Yeah. To kind of backtrack a little bit, having a little bit of just acknowledgement of what we're going to be doing in this space. This is going to be a book talk, just like a interview, informal conversation between me and Aloe related to the book, related to the topic. Yeah, it's going to be about 30 minutes. There's going to be space for a Q&A at the end. And also, yeah, just acknowledging that today is the first day of Mental Health Awareness Month. We're going to be diving into different topics, including things around his journey, the creation, stuff around mental health, DSM pathology, his role as a therapist, just all of these different things. And also just naming explicitly that us as queer and trans people, like we face a lot of different mental health struggles, particularly, especially in the US in this current political climate. There's just like a variety of different struggles, not limited to things like homelessness, job security, violence, etc. And I think that we are constantly towing the line between the beauty of joy and like self-discovery and like authenticity, and also the trauma of living within a transphobic society, which Aldo beautifully paints in the book itself as well. And so, given the nature of this topic, some of the parts of this discussion may feel a little sensitive or activating. And if you are in need of difficult thoughts or in need of support, Trans Lifeline is an amazing resource. They have a hotline, and you would be able to call folks if you are in need of, if you're in distress and you need support. So yeah, there's that. Already went through the discount code for some tech accessibility. You have some automated live captions with a live transcript button. There is the Q&A box that you can submit questions into. Would love to see people's questions come in. And also, if you see your box in your chat saying host and panelists, make sure you click that and select everyone instead while chatting. Last but not least, this event is recorded, and so you'll be receiving that recording within probably early next week, some resources, the discount code again, and then a post-event survey too. So that's my spiel. That is my housekeeping duties done. I think a best way to get started in this would be, Alo, if you would be interested in reading just the introduction of your book. I think it's a really beautiful framing of just your journey up until more recently. And yeah, we can start from there, and then we can kind of start the questions afterwards.
Great. Sounds great. Happy to read it. All right. Introduction. I spent years of my life asking myself if I was trans enough to transition and if I was trans enough to count. I learned the word genderqueer when I was in college, and it unlocked something enormous in me, but I had no idea what to do with that feeling. From 20 to 25 years old, I would watch every YouTube video I could find from trans and non-binary people talking about going on hormones and having surgery. I would lurk in countless message boards and online communities searching for answers. For a while, I convinced myself I was just fascinated by these people's stories, but eventually it became too hard to maintain a plausible deniability, and I knew I wanted someone to tell me if I should transition or not. I wanted to know if it would work out for me and if I would live. It felt life or death, and I know that was not an exaggeration. It was life or death. Everything hinged on whether I was able to figure this out. I looked for stories that were as close to mine as possible, searching for more and more similarities until I realized I was searching the internet for a video of myself in the future, speaking back to my younger and more confused self. I wanted someone to reach through my computer screen and say, "This is who you are and this is what you need to do." I never found one. Then, in an attempt to keep a balanced perspective and not get my hopes up, I would look up videos of people who had stopped hormones or detransitioned. It seemed to make sense. Maybe I was just pinning all of my hopes on this one thing and I wasn't actually trans. Maybe I just wanted to be trans because at least then I would have a path forward, even if it felt like a horrifying one. I would think about starting testosterone and I would list the few changes that felt exciting. And then I would list the much longer list of changes that felt unpleasant and overwhelming. I knew I wanted a deeper voice and more muscle mass, but I was terrified of growing body hair or losing the hair on my head. Looking at the men in my family did not soothe any of those anxieties, and the fears I had seemed to lurk in my genetic makeup, waiting to be unlocked by testosterone. I knew it was impossible to pick and choose which results I would get from hormones, so I would convince myself that there were far more cons than pros and try and put it aside again. This never actually felt like putting it aside so much as trying to stuff the entire contents of my hopes, dreams, fears into a tiny dark closet in the back of my brain, and hoping the closet door would not explode open from overcrowding. The stretches of time where I felt okay became shorter and shorter, and the occurrence of what I started to call gender panic attacks got closer and closer together. The gender panic attacks were when that closet burst open unexpectedly because I had gently brushed past some minuscule gender trigger. The triggers got smaller and the panic got larger. Eventually, I could not stop thinking about hormones. I knew I'd reached the limit of where my imagination could take me, and I would have to try testosterone in order to find out how I would feel on it. I couldn't imagine what it would do to my body physically, and I certainly couldn't imagine how it would make me feel mentally or emotionally. Making that decision felt like jumping off a cliff. I was afraid of having to live life as a trans person, and I was afraid of finding out that transition wouldn't save me. I had been white knuckling life, knowing that it was unsustainable and that something drastic had to change in order for me to make it to old age. I wasn't actively suicidal in the same ways I had heard people discuss suicide, but I had made detailed plans that always started with, if things don't get better by the time I'm 30, then I can't keep doing this. At that time, I lived in Los Angeles and sought out an informed consent clinic to start the process of getting on hormones. I knew I wouldn't be able to convince a doctor or therapist that I was trans because I didn't know if I was. I just knew I had to try. I did the blood test, I signed the packet of forms that notified me of what to expect and what sort of side effects might exist, and eventually I got my prescription. I received my supplies and testosterone in the mail in about a week. 5 minutes after my first testosterone injection was the first time in my entire life I truly thought, what if this works for me? What if this is actually what I need? What if this does change my life for the better? Needless to say, nothing physically had happened to me after 5 minutes on testosterone. My voice hadn't gotten deeper, and I was far from seeing increased muscle mass. But I think there was something about the testosterone being in my body and it being unremovable that allowed me to stop focusing on all my fears and allowed me to focus on my hopes for the first time. As much as I thought I had been doing that consciously for the past 5 years, I had been so terrified of being wrong that I had not truly known what optimism even felt like. I had not been balancing hope and fear, idealism and discretion. I had been feeding my fears and suffocating my hope. I had been so careful to balance the positive stories with the negative stories that I hadn't noticed that throughout my whole life I had been fed negative stories about transition and that the whole scale was wildly unbalanced from the start. It turned out that my worst fears about physical changes were because of the limitations of my imagination. I could not imagine the fullness of my experience as an embodied and happy adult. The only way for me to know what it felt like was to experience it for myself. I imagine you have come to this book with many of your own questions of if you're trans enough and what you're supposed to do with your endless thoughts about gender. I imagine many of you are somewhere in the online lurking phase of questioning, or at the stage where you are still half convinced that you're just incredibly fascinated with the concept of gender on a theoretical level. Perhaps you have been living with an increasing sense of unease in your life and have never been able to figure out what it is, and have some inkling it might be about your body or your identity. Maybe you've already decided, yeah, maybe I'm non-binary or transgender, but I'm fine. I think I can just ignore that forever. And then you have your 12th panic attack this month about the neckline of your shirt. Maybe taking any steps towards social or medical transitioning seems too overwhelming and would break your parents' heart, so you've decided just to take this with you to your grave. Maybe sometimes you think, sure, I want some of those transition effects, but I'm not like those real trans people with real dysphoria, so I'm probably just appropriating the trans experience. Maybe you think your experience might actually just be internalized misogyny or a fetish. If any of those things sound familiar, then you've come to the right place. As much as you might like to look to an external source for verification and validation, there's no such thing. There's no saliva, urine, or blood test to tell you if you're positive for the trans. There's no MRI, EEG, or PET scan to detect it. It's actually a very good thing that there aren't those tests, but sometimes it can feel like a horrible and confusing burden. It can feel impossible to assess your own internal experience of gender when it's all subjective and therefore susceptible to all of your self-doubt and second guessing. How can you be sure? How can you validate yourself? I can give you one small piece of information right now. If you've ever asked yourself, am I trans enough? The answer is undoubtedly yes, you are. I hope this is great news and a relief, but if it does not feel like great news, that's okay too. If your immediate response to that statement is resistance, that's also fine. It's okay if you do not feel trans enough or have no idea if you're trans at all. Stick with this for a while and see what comes up for you. Perhaps try reading this book while gently holding the question, what if this was relevant to my experience, and simply staying open to what might come from it. You don't have to act on any of this. You're not required to take any steps or actions, regardless of what you decide at the end. But know that even if you only decide you're trans in your own mind and never speak it out loud to anyone, your experience is just as welcome and valid as anyone else's. For better or worse, there's no ignoring your thoughts. If you try to ignore them, they will pop up at the most inconvenient moments and only get louder and louder, which means whether this results in outward action or not, the only way out is through. The only way to not stay trapped in the loop your brain is circling day in and day out is to stop and look directly at it. And it also may mean that things will get worse before they get better. But you are far stronger than you think, and I hope you have the continued courage to keep reading and find out what is within you. This part is sort of about the sections of the book, so I'll just skip ahead a little. As a therapist and as a trans person, I believe there is a great amount of power in being able to reclaim our own experiences back from a cisgender perspective. So this book is from a trans perspective for the trans and questioning communities. It is born out of thousands of hours of discussions with hundreds of trans people. It's a collection of what works and a rejection of what feels like it should work but does not. As I have worked with my trans and questioning clients, I have found that there are reappearing barriers and mental blocks that consistently keep people stuck in mental loops. There are very few people discussing these ideas publicly. Many resources seek to educate and soothe the fears of cis people, and there are few that are directed to trans people and their concerns. As much as I think there is a need for resources for allies, I think the kind of messages that are necessary to reassure cisgender people do a disservice to trans and questioning people. When we focus on an outside cisgender audience, then we can censor the kinds of stories that are the most useful for trans people to hear. Attempting to create that clean narrative with around gender and transition for cis people erases the more complicated and nuanced experiences that need to be told. Parts of this book will be controversial and there's a lot of space for debate, but I hope it creates a much needed space for trans people to engage with their fears and doubts without the pressure of appearing to be a perfect trans representative. Primarily, I wrote this book to serve and benefit the trans community above all else. I have written it to help you see that you're not alone. You're not the first person to have these questions and these doubts. There are many people who have walked this path before you, and they were just as scared and unsure. While there's no map, I hope I can save you the time of walking in circles.
Thank you for reading the introduction. I just feel like having a collective breath would feel really good for this transition. So if people want to breathe in with me and out. Thank you for such a beautiful introduction. I think, yeah, listening to you reading that introduction, it's kind of pointing me back towards the part of the preface of the book that really stuck with me. It was a section that was saying, there will come a time where trans identities are accepted to such a degree that trans people are not forced to unlearn the immense amount that we are now required to unlearn in order to accept ourselves. And it makes me think about the how the odds are kind of stacked against us when it comes to negative representation of trans people in like media and like interpersonal conversations. And
Yeah.
we talked about like this perfect trans like representative or perfect trans identity that you had to be in order to like exist in the world. I think one of my questions is like, what are your thoughts on the notion on existing more in that gray area where you're not fully sure how you feel versus this notion of having to know exactly who you are 100% of the time? And like,
Yeah.
how does that have an impact on people like socially or interpersonally?
Yeah. I think our society demands trans people are 110% certain before it's sort of allowed that you're allowed to transition. I think if you present yourself in a way where someone's like, well, you haven't tried this and you haven't tried this and you haven't tried this, and those things may or may not be useful at all. Sometimes it's like, oh, you should go to therapy, or it should be, oh, you should just accept yourself, or oh, you should throw yourself into your religion, or whatever the things may be. But people have this list of you have to do all of these things before you're allowed to transition. And then, even then, it's you have to be an adult, you have to do it with your own money, you have to, the external pressures that society places on you makes it seem like transitioning is the worst thing you could ever do to yourself. It is not given as a option in a like kind, gentle way of, hey, this could be helpful for you. Instead, it's like worst case scenario, I guess you can go on hormones, or I guess you can have surgery if like that's the only thing that's going to keep you alive. Like that is societally what we internalize. And I think for that reason, we internalize the feeling that we have to be completely sure. And I think even well-meaning allies can do that. I think well-meaning therapists can do that. I think well-meaning family members can do that, where they're like sort of presenting this, you are you sure? Have you really thought this through? Maybe you should wait a little bit longer. And again, I think the intention can be good sometimes. The intention can also be terrible and bigoted and evil. But I think sometimes the intention can be good, where it's sort of like, have you really thought this all the way through? And in my experience, thinking only gets you so far. And there's an amount that, like, you've thought about it. As I said in the introduction, I watched every YouTube video. I read everything I could find on the internet. I was just searching and searching and searching for certainty that didn't exist. And my imagination sort of hit a brick wall where I was like, I think this is how I would feel if I was on testosterone. I think this is how I would feel with, I don't know, chest hair. I had a really intense dream about having body hair before I started testosterone. And these things felt really overwhelming in that, like, what if I'm not happy with everything? And I think in those situations, people sort of blame you. Well, like, what did you expect? And I think, of course, there are things that you might not be your favorite about being on hormones. Again, as I said, like, I had a lot of fears about losing my hair. I am losing my hair. It is finally happening. My hair is thinned quite a bit. And I wasn't able to weigh out how happy is this going to make me? How alive is this going to make me feel? How am I going to feel embodied? So that potentially my hair thinning actually feels worth it. At that point, I was just like, what if I ruin my life? I lose all my friends, I lose my family, everyone hates me, and I lose my hair? Like, no, why would I do that? That seems like a terrible equation. But again, there's the requirement of certainty that we internalize is like, well, you have to be fine with everything because otherwise people are going to be okay. Again, what did you expect? What did you expect to happen? You did this to yourself, which is an absurd barrier that we don't put on anything else. I don't think if you went to medical school and you're like, hey, it's really hard, and people would be like, what do you expect? Like you'd be like, okay, but I can still complain about it. I think there's a belief that if we're complaining about it, it's the wrong decision for us. And again, I think we internalize that from society, and existing in that gray area, I think is necessary. Existing in that space of I cannot be sure starting this journey, because certainty is not something I'm going to get from a book. Certainty is not going to be something I get from a YouTube video. Certainty is not going to be get something I get from like theory. You're like people really diving into queer theory, and you're like, this isn't fixing my problems. As much as reading Judith Butler can be very fun and interesting, it's not gonna necessarily tell you who you are. And I think existing in that uncertain space where you're like, I have to be uncertain, I have to explore this with uncertainty. I may find certainty along the way, and I think many people do. But again, as I in my story, and I think many other people as well, as you were saying too, like being on hormones is what convinced me that I wanted to be on hormones. I couldn't think about hormones and be sure that I wanted to be on hormones. In fact, very much the opposite. It was not working. I kept being like, look at all these bad things that could happen. But being on hormones was the data that gave me, is this good for me or not? Is this right for me or not? Do I feel better or not? And until then, it was just all theoretical. And I think giving yourself the grace and the space to feel uncertain, to be okay knowing that like people are going to hold you to an impossible standard, and you might hold yourself to an impossible standard, but you are trying to get data and trying to get information and trying to collect information that you don't have yet. And that's a scary thing. There's a lot of unknowns, but you can't know it before you start.
Mhm. Yeah, totally. And kind of what Octavia Crow highlights in the chat as well. Like, meanwhile, we don't impose these kinds of restrictions on restrictions on any other types of
Right.
identities. And
Exactly.
people have career changes. People,
Right. And I think as a
yeah.
therapist, right, like I'm asked to be a gatekeeper, where when I write surgery letters for people, I'm asked to like assure this outside entity, usually an insurance company, that this person is solid. They are not going to have any doubts. They're not going to have any regrets. Like all of the basically the liability is coming to me because insurance doesn't want to deal with it. The surgeons don't want to deal with it. But I have never been asked to write a letter about should these people get married, should this person go to medical school, should this person move out of the country. Like there's so many things that people do all the time and have regrets around, and it's not my job. Like I can have a conversation if someone asks to have a conversation with me. I can potentially weigh in if they want to hear what my thoughts are, but I'm not gonna stop anyone. I'm not gonna be like, I think you guys are gonna get divorced. I'm gonna have to write a letter and say that you're not allowed to get married. Like, that's simply this one experience where there's just, of course, so much gatekeeper. There's so much like, uh, this sort of paternalistic, like someone has to sign off on it and you're not allowed to know this about yourself and make these decisions for yourself. And what happens if we allow people to just make decisions and be happy or unhappy with it and act accordingly rather than me being like, okay, you got to be in therapy for X number of sessions or months or whatever so that you can prove certainty to me, which again, I think is an act. I don't, I think people walk into these sessions being like, let me tell the trans story to the therapist so that they, they are convinced that I'm trans enough. And you are then probably leaving out a lot of doubts and questions that you may have. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Do what you need to do, but I think it's an absurd system that we force people into.
Totally. I think the having to move through the world with like without a shadow of a doubt, it kind of just it's dehumanizing
Yeah,
to be quite honest. And I think we deserve to have doubts, we deserve to have fears, we deserve to have grief because
yeah,
with any change that happens to our body, both physically and mentally and like spiritually, like there's going to be so much of grief attached to like so much of the joy too.
right.
I'm really curious about actually kind of thinking about maybe, there's parts that you're talking about of like, oh, so much joy, this is really worth it. But what parts felt like you were kind of grieving that maybe you didn't expect during your transition?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of grief in first just of course, there are people who surprised me and supported me that I did not expect, and there are people who I thought were going to be there along the way who were not. I think there was a grief in learning that, to me, what felt relatively arbitrary, not saying that my gender was arbitrary, but I was like, I'm the same person, right? Like, I didn't become a drastically different person, but this experience of I'm transitioning and potentially losing people, of course, there was that grief. But I think there was also the grief of like the childhood that I didn't have, the adolescence that I didn't have, the time that I realized that I was dissociating all the time, and the experiences that I was like, oh, I didn't feel like I was in my body until I was in my mid 20s at the earliest. I for much of my life felt like my body was a thing that carried my brain from room to room. And I thought that was how everyone felt. And realized that is not the case. People had experiences in their body that felt pleasant and they felt embodied. They felt like they, could move through the world and connect to their body. And that was not something that I had ever had. And I think along with the really positive changes where I was like, oh, this is really cool, I was also noticing, oh, I didn't have this for so long. I never got to experience this. I think there was a lot of grief in that and, you know, just a lot of feeling of, you know, potentially missed opportunities or feeling like I was missing out for such a long time. Um, and I think that, again, as you were saying, like being allowed to acknowledge the grief, where I think many times these bigots are sort of just like, oh, see, this is proof that it's wrong. And I'm like, the negative feelings are absolutely not proof that it's wrong. The uncomfortable feelings are not proof that it's wrong. They are the necessary other side of the coin where you're gonna notice that the things you want or the things you are gaining in this process are things you did not have, and there's a lot of sadness about that. Or there can be anger, there can be, all sorts of complicated grief feelings. It's not always sadness.
Yeah, totally. The grief when you're talking about like wishing you had this before or kind of missing out on certain parts of just like growing up, I think is super relatable for me and I think a lot of other trans people too.
Yeah,
In terms of like, oh, what would it have been like if I got to be like the gender that I am now, but growing up like that, there's
yeah,
building relationships when you're like a child or when you're like a teenager or like when you're in your adulthood. And then I think there's this notion, and I'm not sure if this is something that you felt too, but like a sense of like, oh, catching up or kind of stumbling.
yeah,
Maybe for me, I'm like a 20, like I could be like a 25-year-old person transitioning, feeling like a 12-year-old girl trying to like put on makeup for the
right.
first time. And like the cognitive dissonance almost like feeling quite
Yeah.
difficult. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's such a hard thing to do. I mean, I think there's so much of transition that's such a hard thing to do where you're feeling like you're having this like really adolescent experience, potentially physically of puberty, where you're like, I'm a grown adult who has a job and I'm going through this puberty experience and I'm having all of the awkward feelings, the uncomfortable, the like, sort of just like in between feelings that exist. I think that can be a hard thing where you're like, I'm an adult and no one around me is going through this stage. And again, I have the maturity of my age, but I have this sort of physical sensation of being like, I feel 12 years old. And as you said, I think there are some like social aspects where I absolutely was not dating. I absolutely was like not doing the like normal teenage things because I felt so disconnected from myself. I think I was so disconnected from myself, I started being judgmental. I was like, oh, I don't know why anyone would want to do that. Like, I was judgmental. Why would you want to go to prom type stuff, right? Like, because I was so disconnected from myself, I couldn't understand what would be fun about it for me, that it was easier to just judge other people. And then, I was just like judgmental about like plastic surgery. And now as an adult, I can be like, my plastic surgeon. But, I think all of it came back and like kicked me where I was like, I'm just a human being. I was not better than those people. I think I needed to feel superior in some ways because it felt safer than, acknowledging that I don't feel connected to my peers. I don't feel connected to this adolescent experience. I don't feel connected to this teenage experience. I don't know what kind of people I like, my sexuality, feeling connected to my gender in ways that I absolutely could not have articulated at that time. I could not have told you what was happening for me, even remotely. Now I can be like, okay, there was gender and sexuality stuff that was all tied together. But yeah, I think it is very common that, you sort of have to go through those phases as you start to discover yourself, and that can be strange and awkward. And I think, I mean, you hang out with any group of 20 something queer and trans people, you will find sometimes a lot of what feels like sort of high school stuff going on or middle school stuff going on, because I think you have to learn some of these things through experience. And if you never had the experience of, oh, I never had the opportunity of, asking someone out or, asking someone to a dance or whatever things that might have felt trivial at that time, that you realize, oh, there are things you gain from those experiences that I didn't have the opportunity to try.
Yeah, definitely. I think in your book you have a section around like inner child work and like inner adolescence. I'd love to hear about maybe it could be from your experience as a therapist or just your experience in your own journey. Like what were some of the steps that you had taken or help people take to kind of support or reconnect or heal that second adolescence
Yeah.
feeling when we're navigating this experience as an adult.
Yeah. I think I think I mean, I definitely talk about in the book sort of that inner child piece is like finding security. It's like finding, you know, how do I care for this child in the way that I wasn't potentially cared for, which I think can be, even if you had great parents, even if you had a great support system, could still be like, I wasn't seen as the gender or the person that I really am. So there were things that people missed about me. And how do I care for myself in that way? But I do think like that inner adolescent or that inner teen piece is like not really talked about too much. And I think those years of your life are where you're figuring out what kind of person am I going to be? What kind of stuff am I going to take from my family and my culture and maybe the religion I grew up with? Am I going to take any of that with me? Am I going to leave it all behind? Usually the answer is I'm going to take some of it with me and I'm going to leave some of it behind. But, you're trying to figure out what kind of friend do I want to be? What kind of partner do I want to be? What kind of person do I want to be? Who am I becoming? And again, like I think trans people go through these stages where they're like, I am trying to figure out like my style, like I'm trying to figure out what kind of hair I want to have. And like it can feel sort of vain or trivial, but I'm like, that's an experience where you are going through those sort of adolescent phases where you're figuring out how do I represent myself? And what kind of person am I going to be? And some of it, might feel a little silly. Where again, I think like people are often getting like, oh, I can, get these piercings or tattoos that I wanted, and I can express myself in these various ways. And there are other parts that you're just like, I have to figure out like how I relate to people. What kind of partner am I going to be? What kind of person am I going to be? How am I going to support the people in my life? And I think again, there's a way in which the outside sort of cis culture is just like, I think kind of just like be an adult, like figure it out. Why are you doing all of this? And I'm like, you have to do it. You can't skip over any of these phases. And I think, of course, some of this can feel awkward, and I totally understand a desire maybe to want to skip over it. It can feel very vulnerable. But I think you have to sort of address that inner child part of you. You have to address that inner adolescent part of you. You have to like figure out what needs were not met and meet them, however you might need to do so. And I think that journey looks different for everyone. But I don't know, a very dumb example. But I was thinking about getting a septum piercing for so long, but I was like, I'm an adult. I can't do it now. If I was going to get it, it had to be years ago. And I was like, I've been thinking about it for 10 years. Just get the damn piercing. And obviously, I still have it. I like it. It was a good choice for me. But like there was a part of me that was just like, you're too old for such things now. Like, why is that important to you? And I don't know why it was important to me, but it was, right? And allowing yourself the ability to give yourself those things that may feel trivial, may feel significant, but like you gotta go through that process.
Thank God we didn't have to get a letter for our septum piercing because
Right? Go to a therapist and be like, can you please approve that I will get the septum piercing as gender affirming care?
right. You please approve my X, Y, and Z tattoos and
Yep.
yeah. Someone in the comments said something about, I feel like I missed all of my teens and 20s. I sometimes worry if I have like age regression issues now that I'm transitioning, like trying to reclaim my younger years and coming across as weird because I'm acting younger than my age.
Mhm.
Relatable for sure.
Yeah. And I think again, like there's just people who are just gonna be like, what are you doing? And you they may never get it. But I think finding people who are like exploring that as well, that you're gonna feel free to just be like, okay, I can figure this out with other trans people. I can figure this out with friends who are not gonna judge me. And I think also I feel like culturally lots of people are sort of embracing their inner child in various ways. And again, that can just be like my parents couldn't afford to buy these toys for me, and now I'm an adult with adult money and I can buy them for myself, and like collecting stuff that you didn't have access to. Like
Mm.
it is not hurting anyone. Who cares? If it's for a deep reason or if it's just like this is fun and I, wanted these toys and now I have them, great. But I don't think you have to justify like, oh, it has to be for a deep reason. You're not always gonna know until you're in the process of just letting yourself explore that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I feel like this transitions into a chapter of your book that I really love the title of. It's something that I think about a lot of actually like a super pivotal moment for my gender journey is the title around Your Gender Doesn't Care What You Think of It.
Yeah.
Um, it makes me think about a lot about how, I mean, very naturally, if you're not somebody who was one of the people who just knew 100%, like I have been trans since I was like X young age.
Yeah.
Um, I think for me personally, a lot of my learning was from similar doing online research, seeing how other trans people were existing and what types of what things would impact me, like what types of identities can I try to like slap onto myself in order to, it's like there's so much experimentation that comes from there. And oftentimes when we are in that place of there isn't a roadmap for this. We want to seek out that roadmap. We want to seek out the thing that we can just follow to a T that will lead us to X, Y, and Z result. But I think
Yeah.
that this chapter really highlights that sometimes that's not really possible. You can't just like follow somebody else's roadmap and get the same result. I was wondering
Yeah.
if you wanted to speak a bit more about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've worked with so many people, and I had this experience as well, that there's an idea of what their gender should be. And I think anytime you use the word should, that's normally like an external thing that you have internalized. But even sort of this idea of like, I think sometimes people get caught up in labels initially where they're like, I have to figure out my label and then I figure out what I do based on that label. So you're like, if I'm a trans woman, then I'll do the trans woman things. If I'm a trans man, then I'll do the trans man things. If I'm non-binary, I'll do the non-binary things. I'm like, first of all, there's no such thing as like a trans woman thing, right? Like there's no singular, you have to do this and this and this. But I think there's this idea of, you got to come out socially, you got to go on hormones. Then after you're on hormones for a while, then you can start to have surgeries. And like, there's this sort of map that we believe exists where I think first, it's basically like a buffet. Like if you decide you want to have surgery before you do anything, you can do that. No one's stopping you. I mean, again, gatekeepers, but like there's no requirement that, you do anything in any sort of order. And I think that is really, really necessary for some people that you address what is most pressing to you. But I think people get caught up in this idea of my gender's supposed to look a certain way. I have to, do it a certain way, and there's a frustration of and I think that can be lots of things. Like I think many times many trans men sort of try and be a butch lesbian or like present as a butch lesbian. There's a feeling of like, oh, I should be able to just be fine with this identity, and it doesn't work, right? You're just like, this doesn't feel comfortable, which is a lot of my experience was sort of just like, well, I could like dress this way and like change my hair and like that should be sufficient, right? And like something just kept gnawing at me and gnawing at me and gnawing at me that it wasn't sufficient. And there was this feeling, and I think also I was getting all these messages of like women can do whatever they want. They can be construction workers or whatever. And I was like, I don't think that's my problem, right? Like I don't think it's like I don't think the issue is that, we're not at the correct stage of feminism for me to feel empowered to do any sort of thing. I think it's like I could be a woman with any job and I'd be unhappy. I could be this person who's trying to present in any sort of way. I could put on all these different costumes over it. But the fact of the matter is, I'm not a woman, and that's what's making me uncomfortable. That's what's, eating at me. And, I think the metaphor that I use in the book is like if you were mad at like your liver for not, performing correctly, like your liver doesn't care what you think. It's either going to be supported by you or it's going to be struggling. You can either know that it exists or you can not know that it exists. It's still inside of you doing the thing that a liver does. And if you were like, you should do what the spleen is doing, it's like, I don't care, right? Like, I'm a liver. I'm going to do liver things. And I think for me, it's really helpful to think of a gender as like it is a thing that exists within us. And there are things that we can do to support it. And there are things that we can do to make it really hard. And again, these external messages can be things that can make it really hard where you're like, you should be like this. And you're like, it's not working for some reason. I keep trying. I keep trying to make it like that, and it's just not working. And of course, we want our brain to be in control. We want our logic to be in control. We want to be able to think our way through it. And I think people get really caught up in that again. I like that sort of queer theory stage of being like, if I think about gender really hard, I will like solve my gender. And instead, I think your gender exists and it will feel supported by the things that you do because they're like, oh yeah. And again, a sort of dumb example I have in my book is like, you can sort of like try various things on that you're like, does my gender like wearing hats? Let me try and find out. And you're like, I don't know, maybe not this hat. Try a different hat. You're like, maybe not this hat. Maybe your gender hates hats, right? Like there are certain things that you get to try and be like, hey, gender, how's that working for you? Rather than being like, hey, my gender is not what I want it to be, and I'm going to like be disappointed in it. I'm going to be like, hey, again, the gender as organ sort of theory, like you should act more like the stomach. And gender is like, I'm just not a stomach though. And I think getting to that place where you allow it to be what it is and be in this place of exploration and curiosity and how can I support this part of myself? How can I see what seems to feel good for my gender and the things that make it uncomfortable and move towards the good and away from the bad? And that's going to be really unique, right? Like it's not just going to be like, again, do the trans woman things, do the trans man things. It's going to be, am I a person who wants to be on hormones? Am I a person who wants to dress hyper femme? Like, again, you can obviously be a woman and dress androgynously. Like, there's no specific rules about, like, okay, this label equals this thing. And I think that people get stuck in that place a lot. And again, just living in that space of curiosity of what works for my gender rather than what I want to be true.
Totally. I love the engaging with your gender almost as like a conversational like curiosity, like a friendship. Like, hey, would you like this? Would you like that?
Right.
I think that when we stop getting hung up on what these labels mean in terms of like if you're identifying as X, Y, and Z label, then you have to be doing X, Y, and Z things. You have to look hyper femme, or you have to look like super mask, or because you want top surgery, you want to be like a man, like that. You know, all of these
Yeah.
things kind of after a certain point, they kind of become less and less connected to each other.
Mhm.
I feel like the part that made me feel more and more comfortable within my own skin and my own body was going for less like how can I be like a woman, you know,
Mhm.
versus what are the things that bring me joy and
Right.
what are the things that bring me like comfort or like euphoria or like make me feel affirmed and like validated, not necessarily as a woman but like more to my spirit, you know.
Totally.
And
And
having a relationship with my transness almost like a spiritual practice felt like a really huge change for me because then it was like, you know, social, I think, and this also touches on social transphobia versus internalized transphobia too. I think that
mhm.
obviously, unfortunately, we do live in a society, and that has a huge impact on how we move through our transition. And oftentimes, many of us aren't given the privilege to like not pass without having the opportunity or chance of like violence be enacted on us, you know, like there's
Mhm.
truly this line of like self-actualization and self-discovery and just like authenticity and also like real world living around us and like what is your tolerance around that. uh,
Yeah.
I don't have like a specific question forming in my mind right now, but you know, transition and increase or decrease of anxiety and just becoming visible. I would love to hear your thoughts around just like, yeah, I don't know, the impact of living in society as we become more and more uh like as we dive into our transition more and more.
Yeah. And I think, maybe I touched on it a little bit in that like my expectation pre-transition was like all of these bad things could happen. And of course, like I was looking around at the world and being like, the world is transphobic, right? Like I have very distinct memories of people making like really gross transphobic jokes when I was a child, and I didn't know why they affected me. I didn't know why I felt so like punched in the stomach anytime someone did that, but I had a reaction. And I think even as a child, I was like, oh, I can't be honest with people. I heard these jokes and I was like, I don't know why this feels like it's about me, but it does feel like it's about me, and I have to hide myself. And for me, I like didn't drink alcohol because I was afraid I would reveal some secret part of myself, and I didn't even know what the secret part of myself was. I was afraid of revealing something about myself. And again, in that sort of pre-transition equation, I was like, look at all these bad things that could happen. The world is transphobic, like people could abandon me, people could tell me that I'm sinning, like whatever. There's all this stuff. And not to say that that isn't true. Of course, we all know that all of that is very real. And I think there are many people who try and put off transitioning or living like authentically because of that. And I think, of course, that still is something that can like eat away at you. And again, in that light of the sort of like your gender doesn't care what you think about it, your gender is not going to be satisfied with the like, hey, now's like an inconvenient time to transition, so you probably shouldn't do it. Like maybe wait 20 years or maybe never, right? Like your gender's not going to be satisfied by that answer. And I think is going to keep being like, hey, I'm in here. Hey, I need some help. Hey, I need you to do some things for me. And I think, again, I'm not absolutely not saying, ignore the risks or uh, if you are in an unsafe environment, just like jump in. And I think there are ways in which life feels worth protecting when you feel aligned with yourself in a way that, like, I was miserable before I transitioned. I had no desire to care for myself. I had no desire to protect myself. I had no desire to like set myself up for my future. And transitioning gave me all of that. Some of it like silly stuff that I'm like, oh, I actually have like a skincare routine because I like actually care about like growing old, right? Like I should wear sunscreen. I should moisturize, right? Like stuff that I was like before I didn't care. Who cares? Like what's the point of life? Why bother? And now there's a desire to see see this life thing through and see what happens. And I think again, that equation pre-transition is always going to be like, here are all the bad things. Here's all the ways that life could become hard. And the process of going through it, you get to find out here are all the ways that it can feel really wonderful and it can make the hard stuff feel worth experiencing. Again, it sucks. It's hard because I feel like I wrote this book and I was like, we're on an upward trajectory in terms of trans rights, and now I'm like, well, we have regressed quite a bit. Um, and of course, that sucks. It would have been nice to just be like, okay, things are getting better and better. The future is, bright. But again, I think your gender is going to demand your attention regardless. And it may also allow you to find the things that make life worth worth acknowledging, worth dealing with all the shit.
Yeah. We deserve to grow old. We deserve to have long
Absolutely.
lives.
Yeah, I could not imagine myself as an old person at all. I couldn't imagine my life past like 30. And this feels like such a silly thing, but the first moment that I could imagine myself old, I was like, the like old people who are just like puttering around their garden and like, I don't know, trimming their fruit trees or whatever. I was like, I could be that guy someday. And like that was the first moment that I was like, I could be an old person. And it wasn't this like grand vision of like this is what my life is gonna be. I was just like, oh, I could be a 80-year-old guy who's doing that. And that felt kind of like an epiphany. Like it was a little snippet of a vision, but it was the first time that I could see myself becoming that age.
Ugh, I love that. Also, if anybody has any questions for Ala too, feel free to send that in the chat. No, it's been you and I talking for a bit, but we'd love to see if anybody has questions. I think as you're talking about like, oh, seeing yourself as like some old guy just moping or like moving about in a garden, it made me think like what is it? It's like trans perfectionism versus trans mediocrity. Like we
Right.
deserve to be average.
Yeah. And I feel like there was so much pressure that I put on myself to be, again, this like great representative of like the trans community or whatever. And now I'm just like, I'm just some guy. And all I've ever wanted to be is just some guy. And walking down the street, all I want people to see me as is just some guy. And like the dream, right?
Right. Yeah. And it's funny as you're saying that too, who is like an author and also like a therapist and
I
like
know
an
it seems
educator
like
too.
an ironic to be like, I don't want, anyone to see me as anything. But I mean, obviously, I didn't write a trans book to get rich, and I'm glad because it is not a great way to get rich. But like, it was just an opportunity to like, have the conversations that I think people are not having. And again, I wouldn't have had anything to offer the world had I stayed in this sort of like protected, you know, and holding all of that internalized stuff inside. Very,
Totally.
very, very depressed person.
Totally. Also, Stephanie says you're a very handsome some guy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I think I didn't get to touch on this earlier, but I wanted to ask about, I know that we are coming up a little bit on time too, but I wanted to ask about your experience as a trans therapist and supporting other like trans clients.
Yeah.
You talked about how this book comes from like hundreds of hours of research and also conversations. What are some of like the common themes and threads that you've seen from the folks that you worked with
Mhm.
come up, and like what have you really noticed like support them, either tools that you provide for them or things that they provide for themselves?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a desire again to be able to think their way through it or to be able to like find like the right breathing exercise or whatever that a therapist could provide to be like, how do I not feel dysphoria? And I think sometimes just being able to have the experience of like we get to be in the setting where we both are trans people in this transphobic world and we get to be in community together. And also that like I'm not going to I think again, sometimes well-intentioned therapists are sort of like, let's deal with your depression before we deal with your gender. And I'm like, you can't do that. That's not how this works. These are everything's just a big knot in your brain. There's no like pulling out a separate depression thing over here and family stuff over here and anxiety stuff over here. And then like gender is a separate thing. It's all together. And I think being able to experience that process with someone of like all of these things are going to impact you and they're all going to impact your journey and they're all going to impact the choices that you make. And I'm not going to pretend that your gender can be a thing that we can talk about separately after we deal with all of these things. And I think that is really helpful for people. And I think also, again, like so much, just the whole world demands certainty. And I'm like, yeah, you're not sure. That's great. Like, do you want to try something anyway? Right? Like, and I think many times people will come to me, and I think almost always when someone comes to therapy wanting to talk about their gender, they're like standing on what the it feels like the edge of a high jump, and they're like, "Am I gonna jump?" Right? They're standing there being like, "It looks terrifying, but I think I have to." Right? They come in, and sometimes people are like, "Oh, I'm sure we'll talk about my gender for like 6 months or a year, and then maybe I'll decide if I like want to go on hormones." Sometimes people come in they're like, I'm thinking about going on hormones. And I'm like, that's great. Like, if that's something that you want to try, like, if you're curious about that, like, let's explore that. Sometimes I think people a week later, 2 weeks later are like, okay, I started. And I'm like, fantastic. I think sometimes people just need the sort of permission, the experience of being seen. And again, I'm not offering permission in any sort of like, I have to sign off on it, but permission in that, like, someone is like, yes, do what you need to do. Try what you need to try. And I think that can be hugely validating for people in a way where they didn't realize that the whole world was like, slow down, slow down. Have you thought about this? You should take more time. Like maybe now is not a good time. And again, like family even can just be like, oh, well, like your uncle's wedding, like you don't want to do anything before then. And then next you're like, oh, well, like Christmas is coming up and you don't want to do anything before then. Like there's always a reason to slow down. And I'm like, what if you do it now? Again, you don't have to do it now, but if you want to, if everyone's been telling you slow down and you need someone to tell you you can do it right now, I can be that person. And I think again, sometimes parents or other loved ones, I think, can feel that I am pushing people to go too fast. And I'm like, in the grand scheme of balance where everyone's telling you to slow down, yeah, sure, give it a shot, I think is the bare minimum of writing the scale, right? I am just being like, I can be an alternate narrative. I can be an alternate version that you can try things if you want. And if you're like, I've been thinking about this for 2 years, then doing it tomorrow is not being impulsive, right?
Right. And the thing that popped into my mind is like it might be more anticlimactic than you think.
Yeah. Which I think growing up sometimes is being like good things can be kind of boring and kind of anticlimactic. That I think when you're a teenager and you're like, love is dramatic, and then as an adult you're like, I want it to be really boring. Like I
Right.
think this can be a similar experience where you're like, oh. And that was my experience of identifying as a man. I was identifying as genderqueer for years. I started testosterone and I was still identifying as genderqueer. And then like a few months into that process, I was like, am I a man? And I was like, I think so. Like other people don't have to, if you went to every cis man in the world and you were like, explain to me why you're a man, some of them would just be like, oh, well, I like sports. Or they would just be like, I just know, right? Like no one's gonna have a good answer. They're either gonna be like, I just know that I am, or they're gonna give you some sort of like cultural narrative of what being a man is because I like blue and I like sports and I like whatever.
Yeah.
I was like, I am putting a lot of pressure on myself to justify it, but I like when people call me he, I like when people call me sir, like I like moving through the world where people assume that I'm a man. I think that's it. Like that seems like enough. And that was it. It was a
Right.
pretty boring moment of just being like, yep, that's right. All right, moving on.
Yeah,
And that was it. I continued to identify as a man.
totally. I love that. Yeah, for me, it was I had the estrogen pills. I put it underneath my tongue, and then I was like, okay, well,
There we go.
what now? Like, what do I make for lunch?
Right, exactly.
And it would be like, oh, I'm doing this thing, and maybe I want to go a little slow, and then literally within a week of being on estrogen, I was like, I'm gonna go the full dose. Like, I want all of the things.
Yeah,
Why not? You know?
yeah,
But I think something that I noticed in the chat, someone was saying that um, they said that they're getting top surgery soon and so terrified of making a mistake, but they've been wanting top surgery on and off for a decade. I I think one of my favorite interactions I've ever had with a friend when it came to like surgery and also getting top surgery was
mhm,
I was asking them like, how do you feel about it? Do you feel excited? Do you feel nervous? And um, they said, I my surgery date is like 3 days away and I'm still not sure if I want it. But
yeah,
to be honest, I've been in my body for 20 something years in this current way and I'm really familiar with it. And I think the thing that is kind of like keeping me going for it is that when I get top surgery, it's going to be building a new relationship with my body. So
yeah,
regardless of like if I like it or I don't, it'll be different. It'll be a different experience. And I think
yeah,
that that curiosity, was such a huge um I don't know, it was really huge to experience that in such like maybe what I felt like was a big scale getting a major surgery like
yeah,
that. But the fact that this person was still in their curiosity place of like, I'm not sure if this is something that I want. I'm about to go into the surgery room. I'm about
yeah,
to get like and what like the anesthesia and
yeah.
coming out of it with that curiosity, coming into it with that curiosity. It's really beautiful. So I really
I
hope
mean,
that goes well.
I I won't say that it's not possible, but I will say I've never seen anyone who's been thinking about it for a very long time who has then had it and had any regrets. Again, I think there can be a process of having to like experience a new body and, experience the changes and come to terms with that and potentially the grief again. But I will, I think that the one thing that I often tell people, especially around top surgery, when people are like, "Oh, I don't know if I'm gonna want it," Because I'm like, well, you could always have surgery to like have breast implants later if you decide you didn't want it. And every person I've said that to is just like, no, why? No. And I was like, there you go. Like, I think your answer is you want top surgery. The idea of having breasts is unpleasant to you, which is important information. But again, like, if that were to happen, and I have not yet seen it happen, but if it were to happen, and I totally believe it's possible, there's nothing like morally wrong about having surgery to undo surgery. You get to have that experience the same way that people get to change their mind about anything else. That people, again, cis people have breast implants and then remove them all the time. And no one's like, oh, you've made a terrible mistake and you should have known, and we're going to hold this against you, and we're not going to allow you access to other things because clearly you're unreliable or whatever. Like, it's just like, okay, you're at a different stage of life. You can do that.
Yep. You can do whatever you want within reason. You can
Yeah.
do whatever you want. There's
Right. If you're not hurting anyone, you can do whatever you want.
right. To kind of start wrapping up, I know that we are getting to the time slash a little bit over time. Just as a reminder, Aloe wrote this amazing book. Am I trans enough? How to overcome your doubts and find your authentic self, 20% off, using the code Aloe20. Um, I think one of maybe the last things I want to hear or we can discuss is like, one, is there any way that like folks can like reach out to you or maybe like work with you because I know that you're a therapist? And two, curious about any like learnings or findings or changes
Mhm.
ever since you wrote your book to like the present moment, like anything significant that has changed for you in terms of what you've written to like what you're experiencing in life now. um
Yeah.
what's
I
up?
mean, I will say personally, obviously, it is a scary time, and I feel like I'm absolutely no less proud of being trans. I'm absolutely proud of being trans. I'm so glad that I transitioned, and I feel like I have a very different calculation of do I want to be publicly trans in certain ways? And that, of course, like as I don't know, a professional trans person, not that I'm professional at being trans, but trans in like all of my sort of online spaces and all sorts of things, my marketing in terms of my practice and things. Again, I'm really grateful to be able to be a trans clinician and work with other trans clients, and that is my favorite thing to do. And also, it's just such a strange time where I'm like feeling the need to be more careful about that. And unfortunately, even during my book tour, every single time I had like in-person talk, I had to have, a safety conversation with libraries and bookstores and all of those things that was unfortunate, but again, I'm grateful to be able to do this work. And yeah, definitely people can find me online on Instagram at the trans therapist, and you can always send me a message there if you'd like to. Try to get back to people as much as possible. And my practice is called Pershing Square Therapy. If you are in California, Idaho, or Nevada, I am licensed and able to work with people in those states. And if you're not in those areas, I can potentially help you find someone who is, if you're looking for someone else. So yeah, please connect with me online if you want to.
Amazing.
And there
um
is an audiobook version of the book.
it's on Spotify.
Oh, wow. I didn't know. I didn't even know.
I learned it recently
Yeah.
when
The
I was like,
things I learn about myself when I Google myself.
yes, it is on Spotify. We did have one question come in, and I think that this would be the perfect way to close off, actually. This person says, I'm scared to be trans in the current environment we're in. Do you have any recommendations to try and continue regardless? Any remarks or words you want to share for folks around that?
My biggest advice is like make as much in-person community as you can. I think online community is great and absolutely make online community too. But I think if you can find support around you and people who can show up to places with you, go to events with you, move through the world with you, can help you move, like any of that, just physically people around you who can support you, I think the world is going to feel less scary because you're going to have people who can show up for you. And it's just like not you versus the world. And I think if you're feeling isolated or in danger or anything like that, that will absolutely give you some sort of uh, buffering in that, like, okay, I feel like I have what I need.
Cool. Thank you
Thank you
so
so
much,
much.
Alo, for your time and energy and just for sharing this resource and for speaking with all of us. Thank you everybody for being here and just being so engaging in the chat and being open and honest and vulnerable about your experiences too. I really love seeing folks relating to Alo's experience. I also saw some folks who are like, oh, that's not my experience. And I think that's really beautiful too, right?
Yeah,
Our experience as trans people is so vast and wide and expansive, and all of that deserves to be here.
right. There's no right way to do it.
Exactly. Again, there is this discount code ALO20 for 20% off of this book. And we have a 4 bi-weekly workshop series that I am sending a link into the chat right now. That is going to be starting. Where are you? Here we go. That is going to be starting every other Monday, starting on May 19th at 4 p.m. PST/7 p.m. EST. Alo is actually going to be the person helping facilitate that, the author
Yeah.
himself. So if you want to get to
more.
know, yeah, if you want to get to know Alo a bit more, if you want to learn about yourself a little bit more, this is the perfect place to do that. And yeah, hopefully I'll be able to see some of you folks there. Um, Kind of last little wrapping up thoughts. This webinar was recorded, so I will be sending that out sometime next week. Please send feedback. Always love to hear your feedback. Let us know what went well. If there's any types of events you'd like to see in the future, always, always, always down to receive that. And it's anonymous too, so your name is not attached to it. Last but not least, lots of events happening during the month of May. We finished up the Am I Trans Enough book talk today, and we have an event on the weekend, digital quilt making on the 4th. We have queer financial literacy on the 6th, that is a Tuesday, and all sorts of things. Tattoos is gender euphoria, nutrition and exercise for mental health, makeup outside the binary. By May 19th, the book club. Hopefully I'll see you there. We have Mad Pride, zine making, and Easy Tarot for self-care. So all sorts of just fun little silly special events happening in the community hub. We have a few that are public, but mostly in the community hub. If you are interested in signing up for any of them, check us out in the community hub. And kind of with that, that's basically the end of this webinar, this presentation, this book talk. Again, thank you so much, Alo, for being here. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. And hopefully I will catch you all soon.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right.
Bye.
Have a good night, everybody. Bye.